she waited for me to approach first. Laura always did that, stood at the front door like she was doing me a favor by letting me in. The porch light was already on, catching the gold in her earrings and the edge of her carefully blown-out hair. She smiled that tight little smile she always used when she didn't really want to hug me. Just the air between us, as if that would do. The house behind her buzzed with life, clinking glasses, soft jazz playing from the speakers, and that warm smell of roasted salmon with lemon and dill. I stepped inside, gift in hand. A small velvet box with an antique gold locket I'd found last spring. Something I thought Laura might treasure, though now I wonder why. No one looked up when I entered. Not my son. Not the neighbors. Not even the grandchildren. They were all seated already, laughter rolling over the dining table like I hadn't just walked through the door. I lingered in the hallway too long, holding that little box. No one reached out. A few minutes later, Laura looked over her shoulder and said, "Oh, you're here. Looks like the seats are already taken." I smiled. I nodded. I set the box on the sideboard and stood. Just stood. I hadn't missed the event. I wasn't late. But somehow, I wasn't meant to be part of it. And I understood, in that moment, something I'd ignored for too long: they didn't forget me. They excluded me. Quietly, intentionally. I wasn't always like this, hesitant, watchful, waiting for cues before speaking. There was a time I filled every room I entered. I knew how to make people laugh, how to soothe a tense moment, how to keep a holiday meal warm until everyone arrived. I was the glue once. And not long ago. But something started shifting after Evan married Laura. At first, I thought it was just the usual adjustment. New dynamics, new personalities. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, overbearing or possessive. I thought if I gave them space, if I stayed kind and helpful but quiet, they'd appreciate the lack of interference. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was grace. What it became, though, was silence. My husband, Henry, passed 7 years ago. We were together 31 years. He was a quiet man, worked as an electrical engineer for the city, read more than he spoke, and never once forgot to top off the gas in my car if he drove it. We weren't rich, but we planned carefully. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in Springridge and paid it off early. I went back to work part-time after Evan started high school, just bookkeeping for a small legal office, because I liked the rhythm of numbers, the clean, unambiguous nature of them. Money behaves better than people do. After Henry passed, Evan helped me here and there. Changed filters, brought groceries once in a while. He was always distracted, of course. Laura didn't like to be alone too long, and she didn't like to come with him. She'd smile politely when I visited but had a habit of glancing at the clock a little too obviously. I tried to overlook it. When they bought their first house, the one with the blue shutters and overgrown hydrangeas, I offered to help with the down payment. Quietly. Evan never asked, not in so many words, but he dropped enough hints about how tight things were. So I wired $85,000 directly into their account. Told him it was from a bond his father and I had set aside for his future, which was partly true. What I didn't tell him was that I'd sold off a portion of my retirement fund to make it happen. That was 4 years ago. They never mentioned it again. Not to thank me. Not even to pretend it had made a difference. When they renovated the kitchen and put up that marble backsplash, Laura said, "We've worked so hard for this." I smiled and nodded. I didn't ask where the "we" started and ended. I tried to keep visits casual. Short. I'd bring pies. A new book for the girls. Toys for the baby. I crocheted them a blanket in soft sage and cream and didn't even blink when I never saw it again. Then came the little signs. A birthday invitation that must have gotten lost. A dinner moved to a different night without telling me. We figured you'd be tired, Laura said, handing me leftovers in a plastic container I hadn't brought. I brushed it off. I told myself to stop imagining slights. People are busy. People forget. But things started slipping, financial things. One month, I received a tax notification about a capital gain I hadn't filed. I dug through my records. Nothing matched. Then a bank alert showed a large wire transfer to an unfamiliar name. I called the bank. They said it had been approved from my online account, using my login, which I hadn't touched in 2 weeks. I asked for the IP address. They wouldn't give it to me but said it matched prior login patterns, ones from the same general area. Which meant someone local. Someone with access. I changed my passwords. I checked every statement. 3 small withdrawals, all under $500, all logged as insurance premiums. My insurer had no record of them. That's when I started to worry. I had told Evan once, years ago, my login information. Back when he helped me set up my online banking after Henry passed. I'd never changed it. Never thought to. Who else would want it? Then I found the document. In my filing cabinet, where I kept all our important papers, there was a scanned copy of my signature on a separate page. Just the signature. Nothing else. That alone wasn't proof of anything, but it sent a cold feeling through my chest. I'd never seen it before. Never saved anything like that. A few days later, Laura called me by accident. Or maybe she didn't. The call went to voicemail. It was short, just a few seconds of background noise and then Laura's voice. Just tell her it's not something she needs to be involved in. We'll handle it. Honestly, it's better if she doesn't know. Better if I didn't know what. I didn't ask. Not yet. I just started watching more closely. At the next family dinner, I brought a new dress. Brushed my hair the way Henry used to like. I'd spent the morning baking an apple tart from scratch. The girls were polite. Evan was distant. Laura, smiling, told me they were thinking of taking a family trip to Italy next year. The girls need culture, she said. We've been saving for a long time. A week later, I saw a transfer for $2,400 labeled Consultation, Toscana Group. It came from one of my dormant accounts. The sense of betrayal didn't come as a wave. It came as a slow drip. The way dampness creeps into the corners of a house, softening the foundation, warping the boards, until one day something collapses. I realized, gradually, that I'd stopped speaking up. That I no longer corrected people when they made wrong assumptions. That I'd become someone whose presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And it wasn't just Evan and Laura. It was the girls too. My grandchildren. When I called, they answered distractedly. If I visited unannounced, Laura would blink in confusion like I'd come to the wrong address. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. That's not the kind of woman I am. But I did go quiet in a different way. Not passive. Observant. I started making copies of bank records, account summaries, transactions. I sat down one night with a glass of sherry and went line by line through 2 years of statements. Highlighted everything that didn't belong. Labeled them. Numbered them. Cross-referenced with my tax returns. And what I found was not just theft. It was coordination. Evan's name appeared on a joint investment document that I'd never signed. There were logins from IP addresses 2 blocks from their house. A forged letter requesting a withdrawal from a managed fund. A notarized form I'd never seen, with my name typed in. And Laura's email. She'd sent a message to my financial advisor, posing as me. The tone was wrong. Too clipped. Too casual. Thanks again, Roger. I never called him that. That night, I didn't sleep. I made tea and sat on the back porch, listening to the wind move through the hydrangeas. Henry would have seen this coming. He always said Laura was clever, but not kind. I thought she was just ambitious. I thought Evan, at least, would protect me. But now I saw, he'd learned to defer to her. Not just in decisions. In morals. That's when I decided. I pulled out the folder I'd kept at the back of my closet, old business contacts, resumes, notes from my accounting days. And I called Riddle. We'd worked together for over a decade in the legal office. He'd moved on to private consulting years ago. Still had his old school habits, pen and paper, face-to-face meetings, documents double-checked and notarized by hand. He answered my call like no time had passed. "I need your help," I said. "And I need it to be quiet." "What kind of help?" he asked, no hesitation in his voice. "Financial audit. Personal records. Fraud. Possibly embezzlement." He let out a long breath. "Who?" "My son. And his wife." There was silence, then, "I'll be there Friday." He came on Friday just like he said, wearing the same camel wool coat he used to wear even when it was too warm for it, a man married to habit. Riddle was older now, thinner, with skin that hung a little looser around his eyes and hands. But he still had that careful presence, like someone who made space just by standing still. We sat in the dining room. I cleared the table before he arrived, setting out every file, statement, and document I'd compiled. He scanned the pages in silence, his eyes flicking left to right with methodical precision. I poured tea for both of us, neither of us drinking it. "How long?" he asked. "The transfers started almost 16 months ago. But the access, that started earlier. I think they were testing the waters." "And you're sure about the logins?" "I confirmed them with the bank. Matched the devices to their IPs. Traced the emails back to Laura's work address in 2 cases. One even had a signature block with her office title. She didn't even bother hiding it." He flipped through a folder slowly. "You're sitting on a case. A good one. Paper trails solid. If you want, we can take this to court." "I want it handled," I said. "Not a scandal. I don't want the neighbors talking. I just want them to stop." He leaned back and studied me. "They won't stop unless you make them." That's when I told him everything, the fake calls, the exclusions, the dismissals. The way they'd started treating me like a fading obligation. Riddle didn't interrupt. He just listened. His hands remained folded, patient. Steady. When I finished, he said, "We'll start with a cease and desist. Then we open a quiet investigation. I know a guy, former bank fraud examiner. He'll take a look at your assets, flag anything irregular. If the damage is as big as you're suggesting, we freeze what we can. Reclaim what we must. You'll have options." I felt something shift inside me then. Not relief. Not yet. But a kind of momentum. A quiet engine starting after sitting too long in the cold. The next few weeks were a blur of signatures and scanned records. Riddle and his team worked fast but discreetly. I visited the bank and sat with the manager, a man named Glenn I'd known vaguely for years, and closed 2 of my accounts. Moved my portfolio to a private advisor downtown. Everything restructured. Everything locked down. My name and mine alone on every document. We issued an asset protection order. Froze the investment fund they'd been draining. Placed a fraud alert with the credit bureaus. All without confrontation. Not yet. Meanwhile, I still went to Sunday dinners. Still smiled at the girls. Still brought baked goods and compliments. Let them believe nothing had changed. I watched Laura more closely now. Not with suspicion, no, that was long gone, but with curiosity. She always wore silk. She had a habit of brushing invisible lint from her sleeves when I spoke, like my words left residue. She hosted perfectly, but never fed anyone herself. That, she left to caterers and timed deliveries. Even her smiles had timestamps. Evan barely looked at me anymore. When he did, it was brief. Glances. Not eyes meeting, but crossing. Like two cars in a fog, not sure who has the right of way. Then came the text message. A casual little thing from Evan. Not Laura this time. Mom, can we talk sometime this week? Laura and I are going through some things. Might need help short term. Help. That word again. I didn't reply. The following Sunday was Mother's Day. I knew they'd expect me. I knew there'd be a gift bag waiting on the table, probably hand lotion or a shawl in the wrong color, and a card signed by the children but written by Laura. I also knew something else, the property deed transfer would arrive that weekend. Riddle had timed it perfectly. I dressed with care that morning. Wore the navy dress with the white collar that Henry used to say made me look like a woman who ran things. I pinned my hair back and wore the gold bracelet my sister gave me before she passed. When I arrived at their house, everything looked the same. Polished, staged. There were tulips in a vase. A banner that said, Happy Mother's Day, in store-bought script. Laura air-kissed my cheek and led me inside like a hostess, not a daughter-in-law. The girls were dressed in matching white dresses. The air smelled like lemon zest and candles. I sat down at the table. The meal was already plated. As I lifted my fork, there was a knock at the door. Laura looked puzzled. Are we expecting someone? No, Evan said. She stood and walked to the door. I heard the voices, low at first, then rising slightly. When she returned, her face was pale. There's a man at the door, she said, her voice unsteady. He says he's from some legal office. Asked for you. I wiped my mouth gently with the napkin and stood. Yes. I was expecting him. I walked to the door and met the courier. He handed me a folder and nodded. Signed receipt. I scribbled my name. He tipped his cap and left. When I returned, I handed the envelope to Evan. This is for you. Laura took it instead. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the flap. She read silently, eyes scanning. Then she blinked rapidly and handed it to Evan. He read more slowly. His mouth moved slightly with the words. Finally, he looked up. You filed a property reversion claim. Yes. You're evicting us. Not immediately. You'll have 60 days. That's generous, considering. Laura's voice cracked. This is insane. We live here. We have children. Yes, I said. Children you used as a buffer. A shield. You treated me like an afterthought in the house I helped you buy. You drained my accounts and forged my name. Evan stepped forward. We were trying to make things work. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Pressure doesn't excuse theft. Laura's face hardened. You'd really do this? To your own family. I didn't do this. You did. You made choices. And I'm making mine now. I walked to the front door, the same one I had entered through so many times. I looked around once, taking in the home they had made and the silence they had used to carve me out of it. I'll expect the keys by the end of next month, I said. And I'd recommend you speak to your lawyer before doing anything rash. There are still charges pending. Then I left. Stepped out into the spring air. It smelled like cut grass and new beginnings. They didn't call for the first week. Not even to argue. I suspect their lawyer told them to stay quiet, or maybe they were too busy scrambling to contain the damage. Either way, the silence was a relief. Like walking out of a room that had been filled with low-level static for years. Riddle kept me informed. The property claim had gone through without challenge. My name was now the sole one listed on the deed, just as it had been before I gifted the down payment. A legal formality, really, but a satisfying one. Meanwhile, the audit uncovered even more than we'd expected. There had been an account in my name, opened at a bank I didn't use, funded through small monthly transfers siphoned from my savings. Evan had signed the setup documents with a near-perfect imitation of my handwriting. The address listed was a P.O. box linked to Laura's office. Every piece of that fraud now sat in a binder on my coffee table, neatly tabbed and referenced. They didn't just mislead me. They stole from me. And they did it with the assumption that I would never notice. Or worse, that I wouldn't do anything even if I did. The real twist came 10 days after Mother's Day. I was out in the garden, trimming back the rose bushes Henry and I had planted the year he retired, when my neighbor Elaine called over the fence. "Someone's at your door. Looked like your son." I didn't rush. I cleaned the shears. Wiped my hands on the towel by the porch. Then I walked to the front door, letting it creak open slow. Evan was standing on the steps, shoulders hunched, tie loose, eyes puffy like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Here's fine." He glanced back at his car. "Laura's at home with the girls. She doesn't know I'm here." I waited. I need to say something." He shifted his weight, looked down at his shoes. "You're right. About everything. We did take from you. More than we should have. More than I ever intended. And I didn't stop it. I let it happen." "Why?" The question came out flat. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I just wanted to understand what sort of son does that to his mother. "I don't know. Laura," she pushed for more and more. And I didn't know how to say no. Not to her, not to the kids, not to the house payments or the school fees or the vacations. It all just snowballed. "You knew you were draining my accounts." "I did. And forging documents." "I didn't forge anything myself," he said quickly. "But I knew she did. I didn't stop her. I told myself you'd never notice." I stared at him. "I thought maybe you'd even be okay with it," he added. "That you'd rather see your money go to your family than sit in a bank." I stepped forward then, just enough to narrow the space between us. "You didn't ask," I said. "You didn't talk to me. You didn't offer me the dignity of choice. You treated me like an asset. Not a person. Like something to be mined and used until empty." "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry." "Are you?" He blinked. "Yes. You're sorry because you lost the house. Because you're being investigated. Because you got caught." He didn't argue. I folded my arms. "You're 38 years old, Evan. I raised you to be honest. To take responsibility. To work. And you stood by while your wife drained your mother's life savings." His voice cracked then. I didn't know how to fix it. "You still don't." I waited, watching him squirm under the weight of his choices. Then I said, "The lawyer will be in touch. If you cooperate, the charges may be dropped. But I'm not making promises." "You'd really do that to me?" "I'm not doing anything to you," I said, with finality. "You did it to yourself." He stood there for another moment, looking like he might cry. Then he turned and walked back to his car, shoulders lower than I'd ever seen them. The next week was filled with movement. Movers came to retrieve their belongings from the house. I didn't go inside. Riddle handled the logistics. He said Laura refused to speak to him directly, only through her counsel. Evan sent one more message: please don't tell the girls everything. They're just kids. I didn't respond. That Friday, I received a visit from Detective Rowley. A soft-spoken woman in her early 40s, professional but kind. She sat at my dining table, took careful notes, and reassured me that elder financial exploitation was more common than people admitted. She said I was brave. I told her I wasn't brave. I was just tired of being erased. The formal report was filed. They were charged with financial misconduct, falsification of records, and attempted fraud. The amounts were large enough to trigger a federal review. If found guilty, they could face up to a decade in prison. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. That night, I sat on the back porch with a blanket across my lap and looked up at the stars. I thought about Henry, about what he would have said. Maybe nothing. He was a quiet man. But I imagined he'd pour me a glass of red wine and sit beside me without a word, just to let me know I wasn't alone. In the days that followed, the girls called once. A rushed voicemail from the eldest, confused, polite. "Hi Grandma, Dad said you're mad at us or something. I hope we can still come over sometime." I didn't call back. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I took small steps back into my own life. Rejoined the book club I'd quit the year Evan married. Visited the community center. Went to the hairdresser and asked her to cut it short like I used to wear it in my 40s. I even called an old friend from my accounting days, Mara. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown and talked for nearly 2 hours. She listened when I said things I hadn't said to anyone. About shame. About pride. About being used by the people you love most. She said something I'll never forget. "They didn't love you less," she said. "They loved you wrongly. Love without respect is just dependency in disguise." That stuck with me. In June, I took a trip. Alone. A week in a cottage by the lake in Michigan. I sat on the dock with my feet in the water, read novels with no literary merit whatsoever, and watched birds I couldn't name fly overhead. On the last night, I lit a fire in the little stone hearth and wrote a letter to each of the girls. Not to Laura. Not to Evan. Just to the children. I didn't explain everything, but I told them this, that sometimes, adults make mistakes so large they cannot be undone. That love doesn't vanish, but trust does. And that one day, maybe, when they're older, I hope we find each other again in a new way. A better way. I left the letters unmailed. For now, they started with letters. The first came from Evan's lawyer, polite, rehearsed, and so impersonal I had to read it twice to remember I was his mother, not a litigant in a land dispute. In the interest of resolving this matter amicably, it said, "My client proposes a withdrawal of the complaint and a mutual reassessment of asset ownership, with the intent of preserving familial ties." No apology. No recognition of harm. Just an invitation to back down. 2 days later came the phone calls. One from Laura, trembling with fury beneath her sugar-coated voice. "You've made your point," she said. "We get it. You were upset. But this isn't how families solve problems." I didn't answer at first. Let her words hang. Then I said, "This is exactly how families like ours avoid facing what they've done." She scoffed. "You're letting bitterness ruin everything we've built together." Bitterness didn't touch my bank accounts. That was you. Laura tried another tone then, softer, calculated. "Think of the girls. They're confused. They miss you." I had to sit down for that one. The audacity of it. She'd used those children to justify nearly every action she'd taken against me. Now she was using them again, but in reverse. As shields. As bait. They're not leverage, I said. Don't use them to clean up what you chose to do. Then I hung up. A few hours later, I got a message from Dina, Laura's sister, someone I barely spoke to. It was a page-long email, filled with polite condemnation about how tragic it is when family turns to courts, and how healing isn't found in revenge. I didn't respond. Then came the visits. Laura showed up first, alone. I watched her pull up in the same BMW I'd helped pay for 2 years earlier, though she'd never acknowledged that. She wore black, dramatic, as always. She stood at the door like she was here for a funeral. I just want to talk, she said. I let her in, but only as far as the front hallway. She took in the house, her eyes landing on the old sideboard and the tea set she once mocked as too old-fashioned. She didn't look at me. We can undo this, she said quietly. The charges. The court stuff. Evan's falling apart. He won't sleep. He can't eat. The girls are asking questions. Then answer them, I said. She finally met my eyes. Do you really want to see the father of your grandchildren go to jail? I looked her dead on. I didn't put him there. Her lip trembled. The anger beneath it barely suppressed. You think this is justice? Ruining your family's name. Our future. My future, I corrected her, is finally my own. Laura left without saying goodbye. That night, Evan called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mom, he said, his voice low and hoarse. You need to stop this. No, I said. You don't understand what this will do to us. To the girls. We're barely holding it together. You should have thought of that before you stole from me. There was silence, then something cold in his voice. You always needed control. Maybe this is just your way of punishing us. You were never good at letting go. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so pathetically off the mark. Letting go was the one thing I'd done well. I'd let go of control, of comfort, of expectations, over and over, for their sake. Until there was nothing left but silence where my voice used to be. You're right, I said. I'm not good at letting go. But I'm learning. He hung up. They tried one last tactic. 2 weeks before the court date, Laura sent the girls. They showed up with a neighbor, someone I didn't know well but recognized. The oldest, Clara, had a letter in her hand. The youngest, Sophie, just looked scared. Daddy said to give you this, Clara said. The neighbor apologized. They asked me to bring them. I didn't know what was going on. I took the letter but didn't open it. I bent down, meeting Clara's eyes. I love you very much, I said. And nothing about that has changed. But some things between adults are very complicated. This isn't your fault. Do you understand that? She nodded, blinking quickly. Sophie clung to her coat sleeve. I asked the neighbor to take them back home. Gave Clara a warm hug. Kissed Sophie's forehead. Then I went inside and locked the door. I didn't open the letter. I burned it in the fireplace. Because it hadn't come from them. It had come from her. From Laura. I sat on the hearth after the ashes cooled, hands folded in my lap. I was shaking. Not from fear. But from fury held too long inside the walls of my chest. They weren't trying to apologize. They were trying to pressure me through the people they assumed I'd die protecting. They were right about one thing. I would protect the girls, with everything I had. But not by staying silent. I called Riddle that night. We proceed, I said. Full charges. Yes. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. That weekend, I got another message. A voicemail. Evan, sounding broken. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. But it's the truth. Laura says I'm weak. Maybe I am. But I should have stood up. For you. For what was right. I saved that voicemail. Not because I forgave him. Not yet. But because it was the first true thing he'd said in years. The court process moved forward. Depositions were scheduled. Bank officials were interviewed. The evidence was overwhelming. Riddle said they were hoping for a deal. I told him to let them try. But I wasn't compromising. Not this time. It wasn't revenge. It was acknowledgement. For every time I was talked over, managed, erased, or used. For the trust violated, the boundaries crossed, the love taken and twisted into leverage. I wasn't vindictive. I was finished. And that, I realized, was what terrified them most. The sentencing happened in February. Cold, gray sky. The kind of day that settles over your shoulders like a damp coat. I didn't attend. Riddle did, and sent a short note afterward. 3 years. Probation after. Restitution confirmed. No appeal. When I read it, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel relief. Just stillness. A clean slate, but not a joyful one. Like someone had finally cleared away a mess that never should have happened. I spent the rest of that afternoon cleaning my pantry. Not out of necessity, just because I could. Because everything now, even the smallest task, belonged to me again. That spring, I moved. Not because I had to. But because I wanted distance, not just from a house, but from a story that had calcified into sorrow. The home Evan and Laura lived in had been sold months before the ruling. It went quickly, white shutters, granite counters, good school district. A stranger lived there now. I sometimes drove by and didn't recognize it. That helped. I bought a small cottage in Wisconsin, near a lake. Not flashy. Not big. But quiet. Intact. Mine. It had a screened-in porch and sloped ceilings. I painted the kitchen myself, soft yellow, like butter left out in sunlight. I planted herbs in terracotta pots, lined the windows with lace, and hung an old clock that had once ticked in Henry's workshop. Every morning I watched cranes fly low over the water, long legs trailing like ribbons behind them. There was something about the way they moved, graceful, focused, that reminded me of the person I used to be before I let too many people decide who I should become. And in that quiet, I began remembering. I remembered the years I raised Evan alone after Henry's death, those frantic evenings juggling bills and boiling pasta, ironing school uniforms before bed. I remembered the hours spent at Evan's soccer games, even when it rained, clapping until my hands were red. I remembered teaching his daughters how to bake shortbread, guiding their tiny fingers as they pressed stars into the dough. I remembered being someone who loved without question. Who gave because giving came naturally. And I remembered when it all began to shift, how slowly a person can be erased when they're too polite to demand space. The cottage helped bring her back, that version of me. Not all at once, but gently. Through long walks. Through making soup from scratch. Through evenings with records and whiskey and no one needing anything from me. One day, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. Then checked the voicemail. It was Clara. Hi Grandma. I don't know if you still have this number or if you want to talk to me. But I hope you're okay. I just wanted to say that I miss you. A lot. And I don't care what Mom and Dad say, I remember you. And I love you. Her voice cracked at the end. Not rehearsed. Not pushed. Just honest. I sat on the porch for a long time afterward, watching the shadows of pine trees shift across the grass. I didn't cry. I didn't call her back that night. But I saved the message. A few weeks later, I mailed her a letter. Handwritten. Simple. Dear Clara. Thank you for your message. I'm doing well. I live in a little yellow house by the lake now. I spend my days reading and cooking and listening to birds I don't know the names of. Life is very quiet and very peaceful. I miss you, too. I think of you often. I hope you're being kind to yourself and others, even when it's hard. That's the best kind of strength, you know. Let's keep writing. Love. Grandma. P.S. The cookie recipe you liked is enclosed. Try it with brown butter this time. She wrote back a week later. Her handwriting had grown steadier. More certain. She told me about school, about the dog they'd adopted, about how she still had the bracelet I gave her when she turned 10. She called it her Remember Piece. We exchanged letters every month after that. Just us. Nothing dramatic. No talk of courtrooms or consequences. Just books we were reading. Things we noticed. Tiny kindnesses that somehow meant everything. In June, I went to the farmer's market and bought a flat of strawberries so sweet they smelled like syrup. I made jam. 6 jars. 2 I kept. 4 I gave to neighbors. 1 I mailed to Clara. Her thank you letter was 3 pages long. Sometimes I still got messages from Evan. Short. Careful. Updates, mostly. The girls are well. Laura's living with her sister. Hope you're safe. I never replied. But I didn't block him either. Maybe that was forgiveness in its own quiet way. And maybe one day, if the letters continued, I'd answer. Maybe not. The important part was this: I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't living in response to someone else's choices. I had reclaimed the language of my own life. I never remarried. People ask sometimes, usually kindly. Don't you get lonely? And I tell them the truth. No. Not anymore. Because I'd rather be alone in peace than surrounded by people who make me feel invisible. Invisibility, I've learned, doesn't happen all at once. It's handed off in small pieces, first your time, then your opinions, then your money, then your name, until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person who always used to fight for herself. But I recognize her now. She's older, yes. Softer in some places. Sharper in others. She makes good jam. She reads long books. She remembers what she almost lost. And more than anything, she knows her worth. Not because someone told her. But because she finally stopped forgetting it.